morning, everybody. Good morning, it's JPR, and welcome to the finale of the Reviewing Every Pokemon Generation series. Well, at least the temporary finale before Generation 8 happens, with the review of Generation 7, which consists of Pokemon Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, Let's Go Pikachu, and Let's Go Eevee. Pokemon Sun and Moon kicked off Generation 7 in late 2016 as one of the Nintendo 3DS's final heavy hitters before the launch of the Nintendo Switch, and would also be the second generation featured on the Nintendo 3DS, putting it in a similar situation to Pokemon Black and White on the Nintendo DS a few years prior. So, like Black and White, Sun and Moon went back to a more story-focused approach after XY laid down the groundwork for the transition into 3D. But before we talk about the story, let's talk about what Generation 7 had to offer us. First and foremost, Alolan forms, a sort of substitution for Mega Evolutions. 18 Generation 1 Pokemon received new forms that would alter their typings and abilities, hopefully for the sake of making them more competitively viable. It worked for a few Pokemon like Alolan Marowak and Alolan Muk, and some of them are just really cool redesigns like Alolan Exeggutor and Alolan Sandslash, but some of them, like Alolan Persian and Alolan Diglett, just make me go, really, this is worth getting a new form? Although some of them, like Alolan Raticate, are arguably even worse in competitive battling, so what was really the point aside from more forced Gen 1 fan service? Oh, my phone is ringing. Let me get that real quick. Oh, hello, Mr. Omori! What's that? Oh, it really was just Gen 1 fan service. Nothing else? Oh, okay. Bye-bye. Well, we already touched on how Gen 6 was packed full of Kanto pandering, but Gen 7 just takes that to the next level. I mean, I get it, it was the 20th anniversary of the Pokemon franchise in 2016, but was that really a good excuse to make Alolan forms only for Gen 1 Pokemon and nothing else? And that's not even touching on the fact that we later got a full-blown Kanto remake a couple years later that nobody asked for. I'm fine with the numerous references to Kanto that Kukui and other NPCs are constantly making. I'm all for continuity existing in Pokemon games, but anything more than that just feels unnecessary. Like, really, what did Alolan Professor Oak add to these games? On the flip side, the grid totally dies off in this generation, and the world is actually designed for a true 3D experience. Yes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire also totally ditched the old grid-based movement system, but the entire region of Hoenn was still designed in the old grid-like structure. It just felt very dated for its time. Alola is nothing like that, and as a result, I think the experience of just moving around feels so much better than what was presented in Gen 6. That is, until Let's Go happened and repeated the exact same Hoenn scenario with Kanto. Anyway, the Alolan scenery just happens to look a lot more natural and prettier with this change. It feels like an actual world rather than a region made for a video game. They also decided to ditch the little chibi characters in the overworld and the weird floating pancakes that your Pokemon stand on during battles, making for a much more detailed battle scene that accurately reflects where your character is on the overworld map. This is a pretty underrated change in my opinion. It's just another one of those things that helps the overworld and battles feel more connected rather than taking place in two separate realms. I'm all for immersion, and this does that almost perfectly. They probably could have done all these changes in Gen 6, but opted not to to keep some familiarity with a new turf that was 3D Pokemon at the time. Unfortunately, with all these upgrades made to the battle scene meant that we lost quite a few things in the process. Triple battles and rotation battles already ran horribly in Gen 6, and with an even more detailed battle scene, Gen 7 basically spelled their death. The ability to turn on the stereoscopic 3D with a 3DS during battles was also removed due to the performance issues in Gen 6 just getting even worse. Personally, I wasn't affected by this change at all as someone who wasn't into the 3D gimmick, and triple battles never really did anything for me outside of Gen 5, so these downgrades didn't really mean much to me and probably not much to most other people either. Z-moves were also introduced a new battle mechanic, allowing you to use one fully powered move per battle to do massive damage or set up insane stat buffs. Most people don't seem to like these as a replacement for Mega Evolution, but I'm pretty impartial. I don't think the concept is nearly as ambitious as Mega Evolutions, but I do like the more surprise element to them since any Pokemon can use a Z-move, and I admit they're pretty entertaining to watch turn the tide of a competitive match. Overall, I don't love them, but I don't hate them either. There's also quite a few balance changes made in regard to certain moves and statuses. Some are pretty nice, like Burn only does 1/16 damage to your HP instead of 1/8, but others are just annoying, like why does Thunder Wave have 90% accuracy now? You're already nerfed Paralysis, now you're just adding more RNG into the mix. Those are pretty much the biggest changes though, we'll get into the rest as we go by each game. First up, Sun and Moon. A lot of people praise these games for attempting to change up the Pokemon formula, but in all honesty, this change is much more surface level than anything else. Just because you took out gyms and replaced them with Island Trials, a system that functions almost exactly like gyms did, doesn't mean you changed the formula. Sorry, you've got green eggs and ham now instead of the original. It still tastes the same. If anything, I guess it just emphasizes the culture of the Alola region a little more, which is fine, but don't say it changed the formula because it really didn't. For the most part, this is still your run-of-the-mill Pokemon game. Also, there's really not much most of these trials have to offer outside of the actual totem Pokemon battles, which can prove to be difficult at times. The test that comes beforehand is generally just really uninteresting. Like Acerola's trial requires you to take pictures of of ghost Pokemon, but you don't even need a good shot to pass. You can just barely graze Gengar's shoulders and the game is like, yep, that's good. If you're gonna do a Pokemon Snap-like minigame, then at least have Professor Oak come cuss me out for not putting the Pokemon in the middle of the frame, dang it. The nice part is that there's some actual strategies built into the totem Pokemon battles involving their allies, which means these games are already harder than anything from Gen 6 by default. Difficulty is still in a weird place in this generation though. They do fix the EXP system by adding back in the EXP curve from Gen 5 that gives you less EXP for being a higher level than your opponent, which is a good thing. And the teams of most notable trainers have been buffed up considerably, especially in the Ultra games. But these games give you way too many tools to abuse in my opinion. Pokemon Refresh, like Pokemon Eevee from Gen 6, still gives your Pokemon ridiculous buffs like boosted EXP, the ability to dodge moves, cure its own statuses, and even survive moves that normally KO it. I just want to be able to pet and feed my Pokemon after a battle like a good trainer, but I'm too afraid that it's going to make my team ridiculously overpowered. Pokepelago is neat, but it really shouldn't be available until post-game. You get free Eevee training while you sleep, for crying out loud. You can take a number of relatively easy jobs around Alola each day as well, which gives you massive amounts of money to burn on revives and potions. And I know we're still on Vanilla Sun and Moon, but the Ultra games go a step further with Rotom boosts. One of them even allows you to randomly get an extra Z move mid-battle. They did a really good job restoring difficulty to the battles themselves, but you still have way too many resources outside of battles to make the game as easy as you want. But I don't know, I shouldn't have them neglect half the game's features just to get a fulfilling battle experience. It just feels wrong. Anyway, you already know, it's story time. Sun and Moon, like Black and White, is a more story-focused game, and I think that works really well for one playthrough and one playthrough only. The game just has heaps of dialogue constantly interrupting your experience and lasting way too long each time it happens. Again, I don't mind this for the first time I played the game, but I'd be lying if I said these games have the same replayability as previous titles. They don't. Most RPGs nowadays have some sort of skip dialogue or skip cutscene option, but Pokemon is still pretty behind the times on that. But beyond that, this game just goes out of its way to hold your hand, especially in the first island. Pokemon is 20 years old by this point, but it really doesn't act like it. The game is littered with tutorials in the beginning. Even the trainer school, which was optional in every previous Pokemon game, becomes a required part of the story in this game. Why? What's the reason other than to promote the anime? Actually, that's probably the only reason again. When the game actually takes a hand off the wheel and lets you have control, I think it becomes a fantastic Pokemon game, but sadly those moments are few and far between. Despite these setbacks, the actual story is pretty decent. There's actually a fair amount of plot twists and turns that I didn't expect to see, which is more than I can say about most other modern Pokemon games. The story is also upheld by a great cast of characters including Lily, Gladion, Lusamine, Guzma, and Professor Kukui, who all mesh together rather nicely and feel like real, genuine people. Hal is a little weak as a rival character in these games, but the weakest link is probably you, yourself, the protagonist. The game's story tries to reach that same level as Black and White, but Black and White's story revolved around empowering you, the main character, to lead the battle against N and Team Plasma. In this game, you're not even the main character. Lily is. You're basically just along for the ride as her personal Pokemon trainer assistant who battles for her. Lily is a great character who's fleshed out incredibly well during the story, so this isn't to knock her, it's just that as the player, you really don't feel important to the story at all, and that takes a little bit of the fun out of it. I would say that despite Cinnamon's flaws and issues with replayability, there's still solid interest in the series that I personally got a lot of mileage out of, but we still have other games to discuss. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the first Pokemon games to get the "Wow, you really shouldn't exist at all" award. Don't get me wrong, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon do fix a lot of things in the originals, and I think it's pretty slept on as a quality enhanced version, but that's just the issue. Enhanced version. In 2017, these games could have easily just been downloadable New Game Plus or something. They shouldn't have been their own separate releases. Especially since the point of an enhanced version in Pokemon's case is usually to give us one definitive game for the generation to be remembered and used as official canon material, but the fact that I have to buy the same game twice and still deal with version-exclusive material is just annoying. The first thing you'll notice about the Ultra games is that they get as much out of the 3DS as they possibly can. There are an incredible amount of aesthetic upgrades to the environments in these games, and are easily some of the best-looking 3DS games. It's incredibly rare that a Pokemon game ever gets an honor like that, considering that they've always been pretty behind the curve when it comes to graphics. The difficulty is also considerably ramped up from regular Sun and Moon, although it retains a lot of the annoying features that I mentioned earlier. I think the best upgrades come towards the end of the game, though. It was pretty clear that regular Sun and Moon was running out of dev time by the time Pony Island rolled around, and as a result, it gets pretty desolate from there to the end of the game. The Ultra games make sure that Pony Island gives a second trial with Mina and Totem Rabambi, gives an extended visit to Ultra Space, and Victory Road actually becomes a suitable Victory Road complete with high-level trainers in these games. It all makes the end of the game just feel much better paced and more complete. These games also fix a few minor annoyances from regular Sun and Moon, such as late evolving Pokemon. As I'm sure many of you are aware, you are unable to evolve Chargebug, Megaton, or Nosepass until you reach Vast Pony Canyon at the very end of the game. These games fix that issue by allowing those Pokemon to evolve at the power plant on Blush Mountain considerably earlier in the game. These games also allow you to access the base of Mount Laudakila much earlier, meaning that you can evolve Crabrawler sooner than before. Again, pretty minor fixes, but they make team building considerably easier if you happen to use those Pokemon. Some areas are also redesigned to allow for a greater variety of Pokemon earlier in the game, such as Seaward Cave becoming a habitat for Ice-type Pokemon. Thanks to these fixes and the addition of 100 more Pokemon to the Alolan Pokedex, I think team building in these games are among the best. And that sort of helps with the issue of replayability. There are also a lot of other areas that have been expanded on to make Alola feel better than ever. Sadly, the story is still painfully slow and handholdy, but at least if you decide to replay these games, you're more than likely able to use a unique team every time. In terms of post-game, there's still not much here, sadly. We do get the Rainbow Rocket episode in place of the Looker missions, which was quite enjoyable, but after that, it's basically the same stuff as Sun and Moon. Not much else is left to do, which is a pretty big bummer. I was hoping we'd get something more out of the Battle Tree trainers like Red, Blue, Wally, and Cynthia, but sadly, nothing more comes of that. And if there's one thing that definitely suffers in the Ultra games, it's the characters. Yeah, we do get a lot more development out of Hal this time around, and a tiny bit more from Gladion, but Lily and Lusamine suffer the most. There are some pretty important scenes for Lily's character from the original games that are just cut out of the Ultra games, like the conversation on Pony Island. Lusamine is just leagues worse in my opinion, though. In Sun and Moon, you could actually buy that she had gone insane while researching the Ultra Beast, and all she wanted was to be with them after the disappearance of her husband. In the Ultra games, though, everyone's just like, oh no, Lusamine went to stop Necrozma because she's greedy and wants all the credit. Like, yeah, even though that's dangerous, it hardly makes her a villain this time around. And I'm just confused because she still has a bunch of cryogenically frozen Pokemon in her basement, so I'm like, is she evil? Is she not? You're sending me mixed signals here, game. This doesn't make any sense, just seems like a bad rewrite of her character to fit Necrozma into the game, to be honest. That's basically the only thing that's worse about the Ultra games, though. For the other 90%, it's definitely a step up and the best way to experience Alola. I think the main issue is just that enhanced versions are a dated concept in this day and age. They won't work now like they did years ago, and we saw that from the fan response. On top of that, these games should not have come out 364 days after the original games did. Alola was already hard to replay. Don't make people do it twice in the span of a year. If these games had released either as paid DLC to the original Sun and Moon or on the Switch in 2018, we'd probably see a drastically different fan response to them, even if they ended up being the exact same games otherwise. Sometimes the medium can be just as important as the games themselves. And oh boy, we're not done quite yet. Gen 7 has another pair of games in Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, this time moving on to the Nintendo Switch, marking the first time Game Freak jumped consoles mid-generation. Let's just ignore the fact that this is a Kanto remake that not many people were interested in, and try to review these games on their own merits. Granted, that in itself is pretty hard to do since these games are purposely designed to draw in the more casual Pokemon Go audience. They are clearly not targeted at the longtime Pokemon fans, so this will be a little tough. Just know that I probably won't be weighing Let's Go as heavily as the Alola games. So when they say Gen 1 remake, they mean it. No abilities, no held items, no Pokemon past Gen 1 featured other than Meltan and Melmetal plus Alolan forms. It's about as close to the Gen 1 experience as they could possibly get. It's truly a simplified Pokemon experience. I have mixed opinions on this idea. Part of me is like, yeah, Pokemon has become pretty complicated, maybe they should dial things down for the newcomers. But the other part of me says that purposely cutting all these mechanics out is depriving these newbies of the true Pokemon experience. I would ask someone who was introduced to core Pokemon games through Let's Go, but I honestly don't know any. Regardless, I'm not a newcomer, so it's hard for me to remark on this. Let's Go also made the controversial decision to remove wild Pokemon battles, forcing you to catch Pokemon using the Joy-Con's motion controls in a similar manner to Pokemon Go. This change didn't bother me at all. I've been catching Pokemon for so long that battling and weakening them is just second nature to me. So I actually had some fun with the motion controls and the tension of knowing a Pokemon could flee at any moment like in the Safari Zones of old. The only troublesome part was that sometimes a Pokeball would just go randomly flying across the screen. I'm not sure if it's a game issue, a Joy-Con issue, or just me being bad, so I guess I'll have to ignore that. There are some other changes in the game that I find incredibly pointless though, like replacing Red and Blue with Chase and Trace, two characters that basically fulfilled the same roles as Red and Blue, but without any of the same magic. Trace is just another generic friendly rival, and he shows up at basically the exact same times that Blue used to, so like, why even bother? Red and Blue also show up during the story sometime after their Kanto journey has ended, but the main plot with Giovanni and Team Rocket is still the same, so at this point I'm just assuming that these games aren't canon in any timeline. They do add Archer from Heart Gold and Soul Silver into the main story, which I thought was pretty neat, just helping to flesh out the connection between Gens 1 and 2, but other than that, it's basically the same story, which is minorly disappointing considering this is the second time that Kanto has been remade with little changes. These games also abandoned the traditional random encounters of Pokemon being visible in the overworld, and I really like this change. Most RPGs are already moving this direction, so it's just Pokemon's time to adapt. It also just makes the overworld look much more lively in my opinion, so I'm down for it. There's also a lot more Pokemon variety on these routes than in past Kanto region games, which I think just makes exploring more entertaining. Anyway, it's just really hard to rate Let's Go based on the same criteria as the main series games, so I think I'll just leave it at that. If you're a veteran fan, don't expect too much to blow you away here, but if you're looking for a casual trip through Kanto with a few new features, then you might have fun with this. Again, I will not be weighing these games too heavily. If nothing else, Generation 7 is certainly an odd case. Although Sun and Moon have their fair share of flaws, the games are still very good entries in the Pokemon series in my opinion. Unfortunately, after its decent start, the rest of Gen 7 failed to live up to fan expectations through an enhanced version that many felt was unnecessary, and yet another remake that can barely be judged as a core series game. Although they may have been decent games in their own rights, they show signs of a growing disconnect between Game Freak and their fanbase. Regardless, Gen 7 will be receiving a C+. And wow, finally, that's it for the Generation reviews. For now, anyway. No matter what I've said across the series, I do enjoy all of these games, and I think they all excel in many different areas, and I hope it's the same for many of you watching. Let me know what your thoughts are on the 7th generation of Pokemon. If you enjoyed them, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this one. I'll see you guys next time.